All right, everyone. So now let's move into tonight's generations reflecting on lifestyles. And tonight's discussion touches on something that many people quietly feel, even if they rarely say it openly anymore. So tonight we are reacting to a video called The Past Was Better by the channel Raymond Thoughts and Mine. You can search for it like this, check it out if you want to subscribe, and we're going to see a brief introduction to his ideas, and then I'm going to review what he's talking about.
You know, everybody says it often now. Oh, it's almost become part of the hymnal book, the call and response of modern day dialogue, discourse, complainosphere. Everything was better in the past. And it was funny because I think everybody kind of tacitly agrees with that statement now. Everything objectively was better in the past. It was just simply cheaper back then. It was your dollar went farther. You were able to get more for your time and labor. Period. This is from a mathematical perspective. Your time and your labor and your skill set was worth more. It was actually worth skilling up and getting more educated and becoming more useful. There was actual GDP production reward for that effort.
All right, so the central idea of this video is very simple, but also very controversial nowadays. But the idea that maybe, at least in some important ways, life actually was better before. And immediately, whenever somebody says that online, there's always someone replying, "Oh, you're just nostalgic, you're romanticizing the past." Every generation says that. But what makes this video interesting is that Raymond tries to explain why many people feel this way now. Not simply emotionally, but practically. And that is what we cover here in this segment. That's why I brought it here for reflection. One of the first points he brings up is the economic side of life. The feeling that during previous decades, ordinary people could more realistically build a stability, a family, a home, or a future through normal work. And whether people fully agree or not, many younger adults today genuinely feel economically trapped. With housing became dramatically more expensive, many salaries lost purchasing power, with job stability weakened, and long-term planning became psychologically harder. And one thing people from older generations sometimes forget is that younger generations are not only anxious because they are weak or pessimistic. Sometimes they are reacting rationally to real instability. But honestly, I think the most powerful part of the video is not economic, it's interpersonal. because Raymond repeatedly talks about isolation, the feeling that modern life became socially fragmented. And this is where the conversation becomes very relatable for many people because think about it. In the 80s and 90s, people often spent time together without constant digital interruption, driving around for hours talking, hanging out in malls, listening to music together, talking late at night without everybody checking phones every 12 seconds. And younger people today sometimes hear that and think, well, that sounds simple. But psychologically, those experiences were very important because people were sharing uninterrupted emotional presence. And I think Raymond says something very important when he talks about modern pseudo-social interaction because today people are technically connected constantly, yet many feel emotionally alone. And that's a very strange paradox of modern society. People have group chats, followers, likes, notifications, and still feel deeply disconnected. And another point I found very interesting is when he says smartphones destroyed people's ability to simply sit in a moment together. And honestly, there's probably truth in that as well, because boredom used to exist. That thing called boredom. And boredom may sound negative, especially for centennials, but psychologically, boredom often created conversation, curiosity, reflection, creativity, or even a spontaneous interaction. And now, the moment silence appears, many people instinctively grab the phone. And little by little, that changes the texture of social life itself. Now, another important topic he mentions is how difficult deep connection becomes later in adulthood. And this is something many adults quietly struggle with, because after 30 or 35 years old, people usually become busier, more rigid, more exhausted, more cautious emotionally. And modern life often leaves very little space for slow friendship, for a community, or for some emotional openness. And people are surviving schedules. And this is one reason many adults emotionally reconnect with nostalgia. Not because they literally want to live in the past forever, but because they miss certain emotional experiences, spontaneity, belonging, unstructured time, a shared atmosphere. Now, at the same time, I also think it's important to keep balance in these conversations because no decade was perfect. No, the 80s and 90s also had loneliness, economic problems, social pressure, discrimination, violence, and many people struggling silently in different ways. So the goal is not to create a fantasy version of the past. The goal is understanding what specifically people miss from each time. And I think many people don't miss old technology itself. They miss the slower rhythm, the stronger separation between public and private life, the mystery, as we discussed with the life of artists, and the uninterrupted conversations, not only at night but Sometimes when you came across someone in the street waiting in a line for, I don't know, paying your bills in the bank like it used to be, and the feeling that what people miss is the feeling that human attention was less fragmented. And another thing Raymond criticizes in his video is this modern pressure to constantly reinvent yourself to remain socially acceptable. And many people today are exhausted by permanent self marketing. The feeling that you must constantly perform, optimize, to brand yourself, right? To upgrade yourself and appear endlessly interesting for others, for society. And psychologically, that can become exhausting because human beings were not designed to permanently market themselves socially 24 hours a day. But interestingly, I don't think the solution is becoming bitter or completely disconnecting from modern life either, because despite all the problems that are clear and evident, today also offers possibilities previous generation never had. For example, people can find niche communities globally to connect with like-minded people much easier than it was 40 years ago. People can learn almost anything online here on YouTube and in other platforms. People can create independently or work remotely or reconnect with forgotten interests later in life. So maybe the healthiest approach is not rejecting the present completely, but selectively recovering the human elements people lost along the way from those times, like the missing link in the human uh, ancient humans, right? Evolution. There is a kind of missing link between the late 90s and today's society. So let's try to find out which are those elements that we all internally miss, and that's why we recur to nostalgia and somehow because we feel some warmth in it. And that is what I try to cover through this channel. Try to bring the good from the and the healthy from those times, to bring it back to the present moment, but to return to present moment to live now, not to get stuck in the past. That is my concept of positive nostalgia or conscious nostalgia or reflective nostalgia. So that may partially explain why channels like this even exist, right? Because many people are not searching for old songs. This is not only about the songs. People are searching for atmosphere, companionship, slowness, hu- uh, human connection and human voices, uh, sharing reflections, and an emotional continuity of, of topics, of intentions. And music becomes the bridge for all of that. So now I would like to know, what do you personally miss most about life before smartphones and permanent internet culture? Not necessarily technology itself, but the emotional feeling around everyday life. Let me know in the comments or in the chat if there is someone. Manifest yourself in the chat. One day I will see that event happening. Well, the other day a guy connected in the chat, but I know it's still a brand new show. Um, so maybe one of the most important conclusions from tonight's video is that nostalgia is not always escapism. Sometimes nostalgia is information, a reminder that certain human needs still matter, such as presence, community, conversation, stillness, and meaningful connection. Perhaps the challenge now in this society that we are currently living is figuring out how to preserve those human experiences inside a world that increasingly pushes people toward distraction and fragmentation. And that's probably one reason so many people continue emotionally returning to the music and atmosphere of the 80s and 90s. All right, everyone, thank you for listening to this segment, reacting to the video by Raymond Thoughts and Minds. You can check out his channel and subscribe if you want. The video is called The Past Was Better. And we are coming back in a minute with our segment Tools for These Times, after our beloved and favorite recess background music with our weather channel vaporwave background music that sounds like this.